The wind howled across the walls of the twins, carrying with it the smell of rain and steel. Robb Stark, the young wolf, stood by the narrow window of his chamber, his reflection flickering in the torchlight. He had never liked this place. Too much stone, too little warmth. Yet tonight, he forced a smile. The war was nearly over, and peace, fragile as glass, seemed within reach. Behind him, his mother, Lady Catelyn Stark, sat silently by the fire, her hands twisting the edge of her cloak. She had been uneasy ever since they crossed the bridge into Walder Frey's domain. There was something about the man's grin, thin and sharp as a blade, that unsettled her. She knew betrayal when she saw it, even if it wore a host's smile. "Mother," Robb said softly, turning to her, "we've done what we must. The Freys have sworn their oaths again. The North will march home soon." Catelyn lifted her eyes. "Aye, they've sworn, but oaths mean little to men who feel wronged." Her voice cracked like the ice on Winterfell's lakes. "Walder Frey has not forgotten that you broke your promise to him." Robb sighed. "I made amends. Edmure will wed Roslyn. It will heal the insult." Her gaze fell on the flicker of the fire. "Some wounds, Robb, do not heal. They fester." Before he could answer, a soft knock echoed through the room. One of his men entered, carrying a sealed raven scroll. "From the north, your grace. Arrived not an hour past." Robb frowned. "The north? Who would send word now?" He broke the seal, the wax bearing the direwolf of House Stark. His mother rose as his eyes scanned the parchment. The color drained from his face. "What is it?" she asked. Robb looked at her as though he'd seen a ghost. "It's from father." Catelyn froze. "That's impossible." "I know," Robb whispered. "But this is his handwriting." The parchment was old, the ink faded in places, but unmistakably written in Ned Stark's stern, deliberate script. It spoke of loyalty, of honor, but also of danger, of Lannister treachery, and the importance of never trusting those who broke their word. The final lines, though, chilled Robb's blood. "If ever you find yourself at a table of false smiles and easy wine, remember, my son, the wolf survives not by pride, but by patience. Trust not the man who hides his hand beneath the table." Catelyn's lips trembled. How could this have reached us now?" Robb looked back at the raven, its feathers still wet with rain. Someone in Winterfell must have found it. Perhaps father wrote it long before his death. But his voice grew faint. "It feels like he's speaking to me now." Catelyn's heart pounded. She could almost hear Ned's voice in the crackle of the fire. Calm, grave, certain. "Do not trust them, Cat. Protect our son." "We leave," she said suddenly, rising to her feet. Robb turned, startled. "Leave? Mother, we can't insult the Freys again. You know what that would mean." "It would mean we live," she said sharply. "You think the gods sent that raven for nothing? If your father's words reached us tonight, of all nights, then we are meant to heed them." He hesitated, torn between duty and instinct. "If we leave now, we lose their support. We'll have no passage south, no alliance, no blood," Catelyn interrupted. "That's what you'll lose. No slaughter. No death in a hall full of music." Her eyes filled with tears. "Robb, please, listen to me, for once, as a son, not as a king." The chamber fell silent, save for the hiss of rain against the window. Finally, Robb folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside his cloak. "We'll leave before dawn," he said quietly. "I'll claim the rains are worsening, and we'll continue the feast another time." Catelyn exhaled, relief trembling through her voice. The gods be good. But as the fire dimmed, far below in the great hall, the Frey's servants moved with eerie purpose. Barrels of wine were stacked, musicians whispered among themselves, and crossbows were being hidden behind curtains. Walder Frey's grin widened when he heard that the Starks were uneasy. "Let them eat," he murmured to his sons. "If the wolves are planning to flee, we'll make sure they never reach the door." And as thunder rolled across the twins, the gods, old and new, watched with bated breath, as fate itself trembled on the edge of a single decision. The next morning came heavy with mist. The twins were wrapped in a shroud of gray, the kind that clung to the skin and whispered of storms yet to come. Robb Stark stood in the courtyard, his cloak darkened by dew, watching his men prepare the horses. His heart was restless. Catelyn stood beside him, her eyes darting between the towers. "We should not tarry," she urged softly. "Every hour here feels cursed." He nodded but didn't move. His men were confused. They had been promised a feast, a celebration for Lord Edmure's marriage to Rosalind Frey, to leave before it would draw attention. And Walder Frey's attention was the last thing anyone wanted. "Your Grace," Grey Wind's handler said, leading the great direwolf forward. "He's been uneasy all night, growling at shadows." Robb looked at his wolf, who paced with his ears back, teeth bared toward the hall. That was all the confirmation he needed. "Keep him close," Robb ordered. "If there's danger, I'll know it." Before he could mount his horse, one of Lord Frey's sons approached, smiling too wide. "Your Grace, my father wonders why the preparations are being undone. Surely you're not leaving before the wedding feast." Catelyn tensed. Robb forced a courteous smile. "A storm's coming. My men are tired, and I'd not risk crossing the river in bad weather." The Frey son's eyes narrowed slightly. "My lord father will be disappointed. He's gone to great trouble to honor you." "I'm honored enough," Robb said evenly. "But we'll return soon to celebrate properly, with the whole north behind us." The Frey gave a shallow bow, masking the flicker of frustration in his eyes. "As you wish, your Grace. But it would be unkind to leave before Lord Walder bids you farewell." Catelyn stepped forward, her tone cold. "Tell your father we'll pay our respects before we go, but we won't linger long." As the Frey son walked away, her grip tightened on Robb's arm. "He knows," she whispered. "They know something's changed." "I know," Robb muttered. "But if we bolt too soon, they'll strike us before we reach the gate. We'll need to act carefully." He gave quiet orders to his commanders. Bolton, Karstark's men, the Great John. They were to prepare to leave under the guise of escorting Edmure and Rosalind north for blessings at River Run. It wasn't the truth, but it was believable enough. By the time the sun began to set, the feast was already underway. Robb didn't want to attend. Every instinct screamed against it. But leaving without appearing would only provoke suspicion. The hall was warm, thick with the smell of roasted meat and spiced wine. Music played, though it sounded less like celebration and more like mockery. Walder Frey sat at the high table, a grin splitting his face like a scar. "King in the North," he croaked, lifting his cup. "At last you grace us with your presence." Robb bowed his head politely. "Lord Frey, you honor us with your hospitality." Walder chuckled. "Hospitality, aye. That's what the Freys are known for, eh?" His sons and daughters laughed, but there was something cold behind it. Catelyn sat beside her son, her fingers trembling against the goblet. Her eyes swept the hall, noting the armed men near the doors, the banners drawn tight against the walls, the servants whispering as they poured wine. Robb leaned closer. "We'll leave when the next song begins," he murmured. Catelyn nodded faintly. "Do it quietly. Make it seem like a courtesy." The music swelled, and Rosalind Frey, gentle, nervous, pale, sat beside Edmure with tears in her eyes. Catelyn's heart twisted. The poor girl knew nothing of her family's schemes. Then, just as Robb was about to rise, the great doors opened. A messenger stumbled in, breathless, his clothes drenched in mud. "Your Grace," he gasped. "Riders from the east! Frey men, armed, riding toward the camp!" The entire hall went still. Walder Frey's smile froze. Robb turned, his eyes hard. "Explain." "They've been ordered to encircle our tents," the man said. "They claim it's for your protection." A tense silence followed. Robb stood slowly. "Protection," he repeated, his voice calm but deadly. "From whom, I wonder?" Walder's smirk faltered for the first time. "Come now, your Grace. You think I'd—" Robb didn't let him finish. "Grey Wind," he shouted. From outside the hall came a deep, guttural growl, then chaos. The direwolf burst through the lower doors, blood already glistening on his fur. He lunged at the first Frey guard, who reached for a weapon, tearing him down. Catelyn cried out, rising from her seat as arrows flew. The Stark men who had come armed leapt to their feet, overturning tables. Robb drew his sword, the steel gleaming in the torchlight. "Mother, get behind me!" The first notes of the Rains of Castamere died on the musician's lips, replaced by screams. Catelyn turned toward Walder Frey, her face pale with fury. "You fool," she spat. "We were warned." And as the hall erupted into chaos, Robb Stark, the young wolf, realized that his father's words had not come too late after all. The Red Wedding had begun early, but this time, the wolves were ready. The twins burned with the sound of war. Where laughter had once echoed through the halls, now came the clash of steel and the screams of dying men. Robb Stark stood in the center of the chaos, Longclaw flashing under the torchlight, his blue-gray eyes hard as northern ice. "Protect the queen and my mother," he roared, cutting through a Frey who lunged toward him. Gray wind tore into another, the wolf's fangs red, his growl shaking the very air. Catelyn had taken cover behind an overturned table, clutching a fallen dagger. Every heartbeat felt like thunder. The hall was a nightmare. Tables overturned, food splattered, wine mingled with blood on the stone floor. Walder Frey, his smile gone at last, stood frozen at the high table, spittle on his lips. "Kill them!" he screamed at his men. "Kill every last wolf!" But the Freys hadn't expected the Starks to be ready. They hadn't expected the North to smell betrayal before it struck. Greyjohn Umber was the first to respond, roaring like a bear as he swung his massive axe, cleaving through two Frey guards in a single blow. "For the king in the North!" he bellowed. The cry was taken up by others, echoing through the hall and out into the courtyard. "For the king in the North!" Steel met steel. Blood spattered the banners of House Frey. The trap had been sprung, but it had failed to close. Catelyn crawled toward her son through the smoke and confusion. "Robb!" she cried. He turned, helping her to her feet. "We have to move! Get to the courtyard!" A crossbow bolt whistled past his head, embedding itself in a pillar. He spun, throwing his sword. The blade struck the Frey crossbowman square in the chest. "Mother, go!" he shouted, retrieving a fallen shield. She hesitated, her breath ragged. "Not without you." He caught her gaze, a flash of Ned's quiet strength in his eyes. "I'll not die here, Mother. Not tonight." Together they ran through the side passage, gray wind at their heels. Behind them, the sounds of slaughter carried on. Shouts, steel, and the roaring of flames as overturned torches set tapestries ablaze. In the courtyard, the night air was cold, wet with rain. The northern banners flapped wildly as soldiers clashed under the pale moon. The Frey riders had surrounded the camp, but Robb's men were already rallying, forming ranks, breaking through the encirclement. "Lord Bolton!" Robb shouted, spotting the man among the chaos. "Get our men across the bridge, now!" Bolton turned slowly, his face as unreadable as ever. "Of course, Your Grace," he said smoothly, but his eyes flickered, just once, toward the archers along the walls. Catelyn saw it too. Her stomach turned to ice. "Robb!" she screamed. He moved before the arrow could fly, pulling her down just as it sliced through the air and struck a northern bannerman behind them. Bolton didn't flinch. He simply turned away. "Traitor!" Catelyn hissed. "I know," Robb growled, rising to his feet. "But we'll deal with him later." Gray wind lunged again, leaping over corpses toward the walls, tearing into the Frey archers who tried to reload. The wolf's savage howls echoed across the river, a sound that chilled every Frey heart. Soon the sound was joined by another. Horns, deep and distant, blowing from the northern hills. Catelyn's head snapped up. "That's not Frey." Robb's lips curved into a grim smile. "No, that's Manderley." Out of the mist, cavalry emerged. White harbor banners gleaming faintly in the rain, swords raised high. Lord Wyman Manderley's riders charged into the Frey flank, cutting them down like wheat before the scythe. The balance had shifted. The trap had failed. Walder Frey watched from his balcony, his wrinkled face twisted with disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered. How? How could they know? Catelyn raised her eyes to the same balcony as her son lifted his sword and pointed toward it. "End it," she said softly. Robb didn't hesitate. "Archers," he shouted, "bring down the old weasel." A dozen arrows flew. Walder Frey stumbled backward with a strangled cry. one shaft buried deep in his throat. He collapsed, choking on his own blood. The twins fell silent for a moment, a silence heavier than death. Then came the sound of wolves howling. First gray wind, then the soldiers chanting the old words of the North. The North remembers. By dawn, the phrase were broken. Those who survived fled across the river or threw down their weapons. The fires burned through the night, and the stench of betrayal mixed with smoke and blood. Robb stood on the bridge at sunrise, his cloak torn, his face smeared with dirt and rain. His mother joined him quietly, eyes red but proud. "You listened," she whispered. He looked out toward the horizon. "I almost didn't." She placed a hand on his arm. "Your father warned us once. He saved you, even from beyond the grave." Robb's gaze hardened. "Then I'll honor him. From this day, no Stark will fall to southern treachery again." Catelyn looked at her son. A king born of war, now tempered by fire. But deep within her, a chill lingered, because she knew that in Westeros, victory always came with a price. Morning broke over the twins, pale and cold, painting the river red with the reflection of the fires that still smoldered. The smell of ash and death clung to the air. Seagulls circled lazily overhead, drawn by the carnage left behind. Robb Stark stood at the ramparts, his hand resting on the blood-slicked stone. The battle was over. The young wolf had survived the Red Wedding, but the victory felt hollow. Around him, the cries of the wounded filled the courtyard, men begging for water or mercy. Catelyn moved among them, cloak torn, hair matted with blood. She knelt beside a dying northern soldier, holding his hand until his last breath passed. The war had made her numb to death, but not to guilt. "He was 16, she murmured as Robb approached. "Barely a man. And he died for me." Robb's eyes softened. "He died for the North, Mother. For all of us." She looked up at him. Her boy, yet no longer a boy. "Aye, but the gods don't care for banners." The weight of her words settled heavy between them. Lord Wyman Manderley arrived, his armor dented, his great belly heaving with exhaustion. "Your Grace," he said, bowing stiffly, "the Freys are scattered. Some fled east toward the Vale. Others tried to swim the river." Robb nodded. "None will find welcome anywhere. The name Frey will mean treachery until the end of days." Manderley grunted approval. "We'll salt their fields and take their bridge. Let the twins belong to the North now." Robb turned to look across the waters, at the lands that had betrayed him, then burned for it. "No," he said quietly, "let it belong to the dead. I'll not rule from a place built on deceit." Catelyn's heart clenched. She saw Ned in those words, his honor, his stubborn sense of justice. "Then where will you go?" she asked. Robb turned to her, eyes like frozen steel. "Home." Winter fell. The word carried a gravity all its own. By the second day, what remained of the Stark host was marching north. The wounded were carried in wagons, and gray wind prowled beside Robb's horse like a silent shadow. But peace did not follow victory, only unease. As they crossed the neck, a raven arrived bearing a crimson seal, the Lion of Lannister. Robb opened it in silence while his mother watched. "To the self-styled king in the north, news of your rebellion's continued defiance reaches even King's Landing. Know that the crown will answer blood with fire. Your insolence has cost you the mercy once offered. The Iron Throne will not rest until your house lies as cold as its name. Tywin Lannister, Hand of the King." Robb crushed the parchment in his fist. "Let him come," he said bitterly. "The North remembers." Catelyn, though, felt the old dread return, that quiet, creeping fear that victory had only bought them a crueler war. At night around the campfire, the men spoke in hushed voices. Some said Lord Bolton had escaped. Others claimed he drowned in the river. Robb said little, but his silence spoke volumes. When they reached Moat Cailin, the banners of the flayed man still flew. Bolton's sigil. "Your Grace," said a scout, "the garrison refuses to yield. They claim loyalty to you, but await your command." Robb studied the walls. Tall, ancient, half-ruined, but strong enough to hold against any army from the south. "Burn the flayed men's banners," he said coldly. "Raise the dire wolf. Let the Dreadfort stand alone. Catelyn watched as his words spread through the ranks like wildfire. For the first time, she saw fear not in her son's enemies, but in his eyes. He was changing. The boy who'd once smiled at feast tables and laughed with his bannermen was gone. In his place stood a king forged in betrayal. That night, as rain fell softly over the camp, she sat by the fire, holding the letter that had saved them. Ned's warning, the raven that should never have reached them. "Did you know?" she whispered to the darkness. "Did you see it, Ned? Did you send it somehow?" But only the wind answered, rustling through the trees like a sigh. Robb approached quietly, sitting beside her. He said nothing for a long while. Then, "I keep thinking about Father, about the letter. If he hadn't warned us." She smiled faintly. "You'd be a name in a song, Robb. Another ghost in the halls of Winterfell." He looked into the fire. "Maybe I'm already that." She reached out, brushing her fingers against his hand. "No, my son. You're the last hope of the North. But remember, hope can turn to vengeance if you let it." He didn't answer. Above them, the wind carried the first flakes of early snow. Winter was coming, and for once it wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Snow fell thick across the King's Road as the Stark host marched northward. What began as a whispering flurry had grown into a curtain of white, muffling sound and blurring the world into silence. The banners of the direwolf were dusted in frost, fluttering faintly in the wind. Winterfell's broken towers appeared through the haze like ghosts, once proud, now scarred from the Ironborn's fire. Robb halted his horse at the rise overlooking his home, his father's home. The sight twisted something deep inside him. Catelyn stopped beside him, eyes filling with tears she didn't bother to hide. "It still stands," she murmured. "Barely," Robb said, voice heavy. "But it's ours again." The gates creaked open as the column entered. Inside, the courtyard was quiet, the sound of boots crunching on snow, the whimper of horses, the faint crackle of a dying fire. Servants who'd survived Theon's occupation came out hesitantly, eyes wide, then fell to their knees when they saw the wolf banners. "Your Grace," Maester Lewin's successor, a gray-bearded man named Maester Corin, came forward bowing deeply. "The gods are kind to return you to us." Robb dismounted. "The gods had nothing to do with it," he said quietly. "We fought our way back." The days that followed were full of rebuilding. The great hall was repaired with what timber could be found. Fires were lit in the hearths for the first time in years. The men sang again, not songs of glory, but of homecoming. The North, though battered and bloodied, breathed once more. Still, peace did not come easy. Rumors traveled fast. Ravens from the south brought word of Lannister fury. Tywin had ordered new levies, and already gold-clad armies were gathering in the Riverlands. But Robb didn't waver. He called his bannermen to council, Manderley, Umber, Glover, Reed. Their faces were hard, voices gruff. They were warriors, not courtiers. Robb stood at the head of the table, hand resting on his father's old chair. "The Freys are destroyed," he said, "but the war isn't over. Tywin will come for us, and he'll bring fire and gold in equal measure." The Great John slammed a fist on the table. "Let him come. We'll gut every lion that crosses the neck." Robb's gaze swept the room. "We can't fight like before. We'll not march south again. The South bleeds itself. The Iron Throne, the Tyrells, the Martells, all tearing each other apart for power. Let them. Our strength is the North. We make our stand here." Wyman Manderley nodded. "Aye. We close the neck, guard the passes, and let winter fight our battles for us." Catelyn listened quietly, her hands clasped together. She knew Robb spoke wisely, but she also saw how hard his tone had grown. He no longer sought peace. He sought permanence. After the council dispersed, she found him alone in the Godswood, standing beneath the heart tree. Snow fell lightly on his hair, melting against his skin. Gray wind lay nearby, calm for once. "You sound like your father," she said softly. Robb didn't turn. "Father never wanted war." "No," she said, "but he wanted justice. And so do you." He finally looked at her. "Justice means the Lannisters pay, every last one." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. And after they pay, what then? You rule? You rebuild? How long before someone else rises to take what we have? He stared at the carved face of the weirwood, those red eyes, old and knowing. Then I make sure they can't. Catelyn's heart sank. The boy she'd raised, the boy who'd once smiled shyly before battles and kissed her cheek for luck, was gone. In his place was a king carved from frost and grief. But before she could speak again, a voice called from behind. Your Grace! A young messenger ran into the godswood, panting. A raven, from Castle Black. Robb took the letter, breaking the black wax seal. As his eyes scanned the words, his expression darkened. What is it? Catelyn asked. He handed it to her. Your Grace, strange omens rise beyond the wall. The dead do not stay dead. We have seen them walk. The wildlings flee before them, and the Night's Watch is outnumbered. We beg aid from any who remember what honor means. The long night may come again. Jon Snow, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Catelyn looked up in disbelief. The dead? Robb's jaw tightened. Jon would not lie. The wind moaned through the heart tree's branches as if in agreement. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Robb said, almost to himself, the Lannisters are not our only war. He turned, walking out of the godswood, his cloak billowing behind him. Summon the council again. The North must choose vengeance or survival. Catelyn remained by the tree, the snow gathering on her shoulders. She closed her eyes, whispering to the old gods. To Ned. Your sons still fight your battles, my love. But the dead ones you warned us of, they may be coming for all of us. And far to the north, beyond the wall, a cold wind carried the echo of a scream that no living thing should ever make. Winter was not just coming anymore. It had begun. The ravens flew for days before word came from the wall. When it finally did, it was not a plea. It was a warning. The dead were moving south. By the time the message reached Winterfell, the snow had thickened into near-constant flurries. The wind howled through broken towers, and the air tasted of iron and frost. Robb Stark stood before a map of the north, candles flickering around him. His commanders argued in low voices, but his mind was far away, at the edge of the world. Catelyn entered quietly. You haven't slept. I can't, he murmured. Jon says the wall won't hold. He needs men, supplies, dragonglass, anything that burns. Her brow furrowed. He speaks of the dead walking. It sounds like madness, Robb. Old stories. Robb looked at her sharply. You thought my father's warning was just a letter. You know better than to doubt what comes from family. That silenced her. He moved a carved direwolf across the map, placing it atop the wall. If what Jon says is true, every lord who squabbles over crowns and keeps will mean nothing soon. The real war won't be fought for thrones. Catelyn touched his arm. Then you must go to him. He turned to her, startled. Go. You are the king in the north. If you do not stand with your brother now, no one else will. The north follows you, Robb, and it's time they remember what that means. He hesitated. Leaving Winterfell now, with Tywin Lannister preparing his revenge, felt like suicide. But the words of Jon's letter echoed in his mind. The dead do not stay dead. We have seen them walk. He straightened. I'll ride north at first light. Gray wind and 1,000 of our best. The rest will hold here. Catelyn's voice trembled. And if this is a trap, if the dead don't come, and the living strike instead? Robb looked toward the heart tree beyond the window. Then I'll face them all. I'll face whatever comes, but I'll not sit behind stone walls while my brother fights the end of the world alone. The march north was brutal. The snow came heavier with each mile, and the wind cut like knives. The rivers were frozen solid, the forests eerily quiet. The men rode with cloaks drawn tight, faces pale from cold and fear. Gray wind led them, his fur coated with frost, his eyes glowing faintly in the gloom. They passed abandoned villages, doors smashed, hearths cold, tracks leading into the woods and never returning. It was as if the land itself had fled from something unseen. By the 5th day, the wall rose ahead, immense and terrible, its icy face glimmering like a frozen god. Robb had seen it once as a boy, but never like this, never with such dread. Jon Snow met him at Castle Black, his face gaunt, his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. They embraced in silence. Two brothers long separated by war and duty. For a moment, all titles, crowns, and grief fell away. "You came," Jon said quietly. "I had to," Robb replied. "Your letters, they sounded like father's voice again." Jon gave a tired smile. "I wish it were only words. Come, you should see for yourself." The courtyard of Castle Black was full of uneasy movement. Black-clad brothers, wildlings in furs, even a few giants beyond the gate, their eyes wary. Robb stared in disbelief. "You brought them south?" Jon nodded. "Or what's left of them. The White Walkers are coming, Robb. The free folk had nowhere else to run. If we don't stand together, we all die." They climbed the steps of the wall, the wind screaming around them. From the top, the north stretched endlessly, a frozen wasteland under gray skies. And in that endless white, faint shapes moved. At first, Robb thought it was his eyes playing tricks. Then one of the figures turned its face toward them, pale, empty, glinting faintly blue in the distance. Jon's voice was grim. "They're not stories anymore." Robb's breath caught in his throat. The dead moved slowly but steadily. Dozens, then hundreds, then more, far as the eye could see. "How many?" he asked. Jon's voice was quiet. "Too many to count. They follow the others, and the others follow something worse." Robb tore his gaze from the horizon. "Then we make our stand here. We'll fortify the wall every inch. Send ravens to every house. Tell them this is no war of kings. It's a war for the living." Jon nodded. "You'll need more than swords. You'll need fire." "I'll bring both," Robb said. They stood side by side, two sons of Winterfell, one born of ice, the other of blood, watching the slow, certain march of death toward the realm of men. Far below, the fires of Castle Black flickered weakly against the night. Robb turned to Jon. "Whatever happens, brother, we face it together." Jon met his eyes. Together. The horn sounded then. Once, twice, 3 times. The ancient call that had not been heard in centuries. White Walkers. The dead were no longer coming. They were here. The first horn blast had sent every man in Castle Black into motion. By the third, the wall itself seemed to tremble. Snow came sideways, whipped by a freezing wind that howled like 1,000 ghosts. The sky was the color of steel, and the world below was a blur of white and shadow. From that endless white, they came. The dead, silent and relentless, their eyes burning blue beneath tattered flesh. Robb Stark stood upon the wall beside Jon Snow, the wind clawing at his cloak. His face was pale, his beard rimed with frost, but his eyes, those were alive, fierce, and full of fire. "How many?" Robb asked, staring down at the advancing tide. Jon's jaw clenched. "More than we have arrows, more than we have men." Below, torches flickered to life as the defenders prepared. Wildlings, brothers of the Night's Watch, and Northmen alike formed ranks, shivering, praying, or whispering last words to gods old and new. The great Jon Umber's laugh echoed across the ice. "Aye, they're ugly bastards. Let's send 'em back to their graves, eh?" He raised his axe and roared, and the men cheered weakly in reply. Fear still gripped them, but fear was better than despair. Gray wind prowled at the wall's base, teeth bared, hackles raised. Even the direwolf seemed uneasy. Every animal sense screamed that this was no mortal foe. As night fell, the White Walkers appeared. Tall, thin figures in pale armor, their swords glimmering like frost. They didn't march. They glided, the snow curling away from their feet. And with them came the Whites, thousands upon thousands, a wave of dead flesh and clattering bones. The sound of it, that hideous, moaning chorus, rolled through the dark like thunder. Robb gripped his sword. "Signal the fire trenches." Jon nodded, raising his hand. "Now!" Torches flew over the wall, striking oil-soaked pits below. In an instant, lines of flame roared to life, spreading across the ice like rivers of gold. The heat hit them even from above. The Whites screamed, a terrible shrieking sound. And those at the front fell, consumed by fire. but the rest climbed over them. Arrows rained down. Catapults hurled burning pitch. Giants hurled boulders into the endless horde, crushing dozens at a time. Still, they came. The dead did not stop. "Hold the gate!" Jon shouted as the first ranks reached the wall. Men poured boiling oil down through the murder holes, but already the cold was seeping through the stone. Ice began to form along the gate's hinges, creeping like a living thing. Robb turned to Jon. "They'll break through." Jon drew his sword, Longclaw, the Valyrian steel glinting faintly in the torchlight. "Then we meet them there." The tunnel below the wall was a nightmare of shadows and echoes. Men waited with torches, swords drawn, breath steaming in the cold. Robb and Jon moved among them, brothers once more, standing shoulder to shoulder. Catelyn's face flashed in Robb's mind for a moment. Her voice, her warning, the letter that had saved him once. "Be patient, not proud." He smiled grimly. "Seems patience won't save us now, Father." The sound of cracking wood tore through the tunnel. The gate shuddered, groaned, then splintered. "Hold the line!" Robb roared. The first wave of whites poured in, crawling, clawing, biting. Their eyes glowed blue in the torchlight, their mouths open in silent screams. The smell of death hit like a blow. Steel met ice. Fire met frost. Robb's sword flashed, cutting through dead flesh. Again and again. Jon fought beside him, Longclaw singing as it sliced through a White Walker's neck. The creature exploding into shards of frost. Men screamed, burned, fell. The tunnel became a furnace of blood and fire. Gray wind appeared in the chaos, tearing into the dead, his fur aflame from spilled oil, but his rage unstoppable. "Fall back!" someone shouted. "There's too many!" "No!" Robb barked. "No one runs. We hold here." And hold they did, for hours that felt like days, until arms grew heavy and blades dulled. Then suddenly silence. The whites stopped. Their movements ceased, their heads turning in eerie unison toward the open gate. Through the drifting snow, a figure emerged, tall, regal, eyes like burning sapphires. His armor shimmered with frost, and every step he took froze the ground beneath him. Jon's breath caught. The Night King! Robb felt the world grow smaller, colder. His fingers trembled around his sword hilt. So it's true. The Night King raised a hand, and the dead rose again. The battlefield outside came alive with horror. Fallen men twisting, gasping, turning their heads toward the wall. Their eyes opened. Blue. "7 hells," Robb whispered. Jon stepped forward, raising Longclaw. "We end this, or we die here." Robb looked at his brother, firelight flickering in both their eyes. "Then we die as Starks." They charged together. 2 wolves against the winter itself. Longclaw struck first, the Valyrian steel blazing as it met the Night King's blade. The sound was like thunder. Robb swung his sword in the same breath, steel clanging against ice. The shock of it numbed his arm. The Night King moved with unnatural grace, his every motion silent, effortless. He parried Robb's blow and sent him crashing against the tunnel wall. Jon lunged again, but the ice blade caught his shoulder, slicing through fur and flesh. Robb roared, tackling the creature, driving his sword into its chest. The blade shattered like glass. The Night King looked down at him, expressionless, ancient, merciless. He raised his hand, and a blast of cold swept through the tunnel, snuffing every torch, freezing every breath. Robb gasped as frost crept up his arm, turning his veins blue. Jon shouted his name, slashing wildly, but the Night King vanished into a cloud of snow and shadow. The whites surged forward once more. "Get him out!" Jon screamed. "Fall back!" Strong hands dragged Robb through the tunnel, his body shaking violently. The frost was spreading. He could feel it burning inside him, the cold eating him alive. Above them, the horns still sounded, long, deep, mournful. The dead had breached the wall, and the living were running out of time. They carried Robb back through the tunnel while the wall shook with the thunder of war. The screams of men and the howls of the undead echoed from below, a chorus of death that swallowed all other sound. Snow fell like ash. Every step left a crimson mark. Jon Snow and a handful of brothers laid Robb on a table near the fire in the Lord Commander's chambers. His skin was pale, rimed with frost. Every breath came shallow and ragged. The cold had taken hold of him, crawling beneath the skin, turning veins into rivers of ice. "Get firewood," Jon barked. "Bring heat, anything that burns." A dozen men obeyed, feeding the hearth until the flames roared. Still, the frost didn't melt. Robb's lips turned blue. "Jon," he whispered, his voice a ghost. Jon knelt beside him, gripping his hand. "I'm here." Robb tried to speak, but only a faint mist escaped his lips. He turned his head toward the sound of distant battle, the muffled cries, the horns, the rising storm. "They'll break through," he gasped. "Not if we hold," Jon said fiercely. "The wall's still standing. You did enough." Robb's eyes found his, tired, proud, and unbearably young. "Enough? No, not yet. The North needs a Stark." Jon shook his head. "The North needs both of us." Robb managed the ghost of a smile. "Then, promise me, you'll protect them. All of them. The living." Jon's throat tightened. "You have my word, brother." Robb's grip weakened, his hand trembling. The frost climbed higher, spreading like veins of crystal beneath his skin. Jon grabbed a heated dagger from the fire and pressed it to Robb's chest, desperate, defiant. The smell of burning flesh filled the room, but Robb didn't cry out. He only exhaled a soft breath that sounded almost like relief. For a moment, the frost stopped spreading. Then the earth itself seemed to shudder. A horn sounded, a closer now, deeper. Men shouted from the courtyard, the cry carrying up through the tower. "They've broken through the gate!" Jon turned to the door. The sound of splintering wood echoed like thunder. He looked back at Robb. "I'll come back. Hold on." Robb's eyes fluttered. "Go." Jon hesitated, then ran, sword drawn, cloak whipping behind him. Outside, chaos ruled. The gate had fallen. The dead poured through in a tide of blue eyes and broken bodies. Fire raged across the yard as barrels of oil were lit and hurled. Giants fought beside men, swinging tree trunks like clubs, crushing waves of whites before being dragged down under their numbers. Jon waded into the fight, Longclaw blazing in the dim light. Each swing cut through the dead like smoke. The Valyrian steel flared white against the cold, and for every white he felled, 10 more took its place. He fought until his arms went numb, until blood and snow became one. The world narrowed to blade and breath, to heat and cold. Then a new sound cut through the storm, the deep, familiar roar of a direwolf. Grey wind. Jon looked up. From the battlements, the great beast leapt into the fray, tearing through the dead like a storm-given flesh. Blood and ice flew, but even Grey Wind was outnumbered. The dead swarmed him, claws raking, teeth tearing. "Grey Wind!" Jon shouted, but it was too late. The wolf's final snarl was drowned in the sound of 1,000 shrieks, and somewhere above, a new cry answered. Long, wild, inhuman. Jon looked up to see the Night King on the ridge of the wall, his hand raised. Around him the air shimmered with pale light. Every corpse on the ground twitched, even Grey Winds. "No," Jon whispered. The wolf rose again, eyes blazing blue, its movements jerky, unnatural. It turned its gaze toward Jon, its master, its kin, and for one terrible heartbeat it hesitated. Then it charged. Jon's cry was half battle, half grief. Longclaw flashed, one strike, clean and merciful. The wolf fell, silent at last. Back in the tower, Catelyn Stark arrived. She had come north with supplies and healers, days behind the army. When she saw the wall burning in the distance, she rode through the storm without rest. When she entered the chamber, Robb was still alive, barely. His body trembled, the frost now covering his chest. She ran to him, falling to her knees. "Robb, my son." His eyes flickered open at her voice. "Mother." Tears froze on her cheeks. "You should have stayed home." He smiled faintly. "Winter wouldn't let me." She took his face in her hands. "You did everything you could. You saved the North." He shook his head weakly. "No, not yet. He looked toward the window where the snow glowed faintly blue from the fighting outside. Jon, he'll finish it. He'll lead them. Catelyn pressed her forehead to his. You rest now, my boy. Robb's breathing slowed. The cold stopped spreading. For a moment his eyes cleared, and the frost seemed to retreat from his face. Tell father, he whispered. I listened. And then, with a final breath, the king in the north was still. Jon found him minutes later, kneeling beside Catelyn, her face pale, her hands folded over her son's chest. He's gone, she whispered, but he saved us. Jon closed his eyes, grief and rage warring inside him. He was the north. She looked up at him, eyes full of both sorrow and something like peace. Then be the wall that stands in its place. Outside, the storm howled. The Night King watched from the ice ridge, his army still vast, still waiting. But for the first time he paused. Atop the wall a horn sounded again. One blast, strong and defiant. The living still stood. Jon raised Longclaw high, its edge burning with reflected fire. For the king in the north, he shouted. The cry spread through what was left of the defenders. For Robb Stark. For Winterfell. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the wall itself seemed to answer. The deep groan of ice, ancient and alive, shaking the ground. Flames burst along its length, searing blue against blue. The Night King's calm expression faltered as cracks of light tore through the ice beneath his feet. And when the wall exploded in fire and fury, Jon Snow stood at its heart, the legacy of both his brothers burning in his eyes. Winter had come. But the wolves had not bowed.